Mosaic, a daily news program from Link TV, presents a selection of news reports from independent and state-controlled broadcasters from throughout the Middle East.
The former Iraqi president and members of his regime face separate trials for many charges, setting a new precedent in the methods of such trials.
9 نيسان عام 2003 شاهد حي على انتهاء مرحلة وبداية مرحلة أخرى. انتهت مرحلة عراق صدام حسين.
April 9th, 2003, we witnessed on live television the end of one era and the beginning of a new one. The era of Saddam Hussein's regime ended, and the era of a new Iraq began after his rule for 24 years. Ever since the U.S. forces entered Baghdad on April 9th, Saddam Hussein was forced into hiding. Using audio tapes, he threatened the coalition forces and its allies while promising others that he will regain power of his country. However, he was arrested at a farm near the city of Dura, close to Tikrit, on December 13, 2003, the same city that considered him a star for many years. The only thing there is no doubt about is that Saddam and 7 of his companions will appear tomorrow in front of 5 Iraqi judges who will preside over the accusation of his killing 143 Shiites in the village of Dijail, the destruction of their properties and uprooting of their lands, as well as imprisoning them for 7 years. This was done to avenge the attack on Saddam's convoy in 1982. Afterwards, Saddam Hussein committed crimes against humanity and war crimes in many cases, especially the Anfal operation, which targeted the Kurds in the late 80s, the bombing of the Kurdish village of Halabja with chemical weapons, the invasion of Kuwait in 1990, and the repression of the Shiite uprising in 1991, as well as violently settling religious and political disputes.
هل يعقل أن تجرى محاكمة لشخص أيا كان؟
Is it reasonable to conduct a trial for a person, whoever he is, without the defense being allowed to look at the documents and examine them in order to be able to form a defense argument and strategies? The question is, what will happen tomorrow? It should be a hearing where the defendants will be told about the accusations made against them. Also, time should be allotted for the defense to look and examine the accusations.
Monitors believe that the trial will not last a long time. The sentence will not be handed down until after 30 days from the beginning of the trial. The question now being asked is this: will the trial of Saddam Hussein and members of the former regime be the beginning of the end of violence in Iraq, especially since the American administration justified its invasion of Iraq by claiming that he supported terrorism and possessed weapons of mass destruction?
The National Office for the Independent Higher Authority of Elections confirmed that they have processed and counted all votes of the referendum on the draft constitution. In a statement issued to the Iraqiya television, the general manager of the higher authority, Adel Ailani, confirmed that they do not have the official results or the percentage distribution of the votes in Baghdad or in any other municipalities. He added that the count is being administered and monitored by the United Nations.
The Independent Higher Authority of Elections announced that any results or percentages of votes reported by mass media outlets are not accurate and were not issued by it or by any of its affiliated offices. Employees and administrators of the higher authority continue to count and recount votes, and once it is complete, they will make the results public.
تنظر أيضا بقلق لرغبة الناس
We at the higher authority know that people are very anxious to know the results of the referendum. However, we must take our time in processing and counting the votes in order to show people how accurate and transparent our work is. We must check, recheck, and audit the results and number of the votes. Any results reported by media outlets are not accurate and lack transparency.
The higher authority of elections will announce the preliminary results of the referendum. Then it will announce the official numbers a few days later, after the lapse of the grace period. During that period, we'll attend to any complaints regarding the preliminary results of the referendum. After that, complaints will not be taken into consideration.
The election authority confirmed that its employees are independent, unbiased, and will be held to high standards of transparency and accuracy.
من مختلف ألوان الطيف العراقي فينا المسلم فينا المسيحي فينا السني.
We at the higher authority are very diversified. We have Muslims, Sunnis and Shiites, Christians, Kurds and Turkmen. There is no way that one person could influence or impose his decision on the others. The decision is reached unanimously and collectively. We hold ourselves to a high standard of transparency.
بشكل جماعي وبالتصويت ونحن في الإدارة الانتخابية ننفذ هذه القرارات بكل شفافية.
أنا أعتقد كل هذه التشكيكات غير جدية وغير لا تمتلك رصيد حقيقي.
We at the higher authority believe that the criticism cited against us is baseless and will serve the interest of those who are trying to undermine our fine work. We do not care about these charges because our work is independent, unbiased, transparent, and thorough. We will continue our work without any outside pressure, interference, or manipulation.
After casting their ballots in the referendum on the draft constitution, the Iraqis are looking forward to seeing the results of their votes. Soon they will have a new and a permanent constitution that will build a promising and a bright future for them.
أعرب الأمين العام لجامعة الدول العربية عن أمله في أن يحقق مؤتمر الوحدة الوطنية.
The Secretary General of the Arab League expressed his hope that the conference, which was held to strengthen the Iraqi national unity, will succeed in doing so. In an opening speech at the conference today, he asked the Iraqis to prioritize the collective interests of Iraq. The Independent Higher Committee for the Elections announced that it is carrying out a detailed count of the constitution referendum in a number of provinces, which will result in delaying the results for a few days. Meanwhile, 18 people were killed in various areas in Iraq. 8 bodies, suspected to be from the Iraqi army, were also found.
يعتقد أنها لعناصر في الجيش العراقي.
تمهيدا لمؤتمر مصالحة عراقية تحت مظلة جامعة الدول العربية.
The Arab League sponsored the National Unity Conference, which began on Monday afternoon with the attendance of the Iraqi Unity Movement leader Iyad Allawi, who is also the former Prime Minister, with the participation of a large number of Iraqi political parties. The conference comes under the framework of Arab support to Iraq, represented by the anticipated visit of the Arab League General Secretary to Baghdad to contain the political crisis. This was confirmed by the General Secretary's message, which was given at the conference by his representative.
رسالة الأمين العام التي ألقاها ممثله في المؤتمر.
ومن هذا المنظور
From this perspective, the Ministerial Committee of the Arab League, which met with Jeddah at the beginning of this month, made a decision to support Iraq. A delegation of senior officials decided to prepare for a visit to Iraq to communicate with all Iraqis to hold a conference, excluding no one, in order to reach a comprehensive agreement which will carry Iraq, its people, and confirm its unity and stability.
With the continued counting of the ballots, the spokesman of the election committee, Farid Ayyar, announced that the initial results and percentages are not final in the provinces of Al-Basra, Karbala and Najaf, where more than 90% of the people voted yes on the constitution. Meanwhile, 80% of the people voted no on the constitution in the provinces of Salahuddin and Ramadi. Those who voted against the constitution are putting hope on the Nineveh province in the north, which is a critical area for either the passage of the constitution or rejection of it. That is, if 2/3 of the Iraqis vote no on the constitution referendum in 3 Iraqi provinces. This comes as political parties that oppose the constitution warn against the danger of passing it.
ويأتي ذلك وسط تحذيرات الكتل المعارضة للدستور من مخاطر تمريره.
We strongly warn against forging the results and passing the Constitution because it will create a response of civil disobedience that cannot be contained.
أمنيا قال الجيش الأمريكي أن مقاتلاته ومروحيته قتلت نحو.
On the security level, the United States Army said that its armies and helicopters killed nearly 70 suspected armed fighters. This comes amidst a series of air raids on the city of Ramadi and surrounding areas in western Iraq. In Kirkuk, the Iraqi police announced that 2 policemen were killed by gunshots from an armed assailant. An Iraqi Interior Minister statement said that 11 armed assailants were killed and 57 other suspects were arrested in Mahmoudi village, south of the capital.
من بغداد على جعفر تلفزيون المملكة العربية السعودية.
According to an official count by the Pakistani authority, the number of people killed in the devastating earthquake has risen to 53,000 victims. Meanwhile, international relief and rescue missions have failed to reach thousands of people trapped in cold remote mountain areas without food or shelter.
وجه جديد من الكارثة الإنسانية في كشمير بدأت.
In the area of Kashmir, a new human catastrophe started to unfold in the aftermath of the most devastating earthquake in the history of the region. On the first day of the earthquake, the preliminary number of victims was estimated at 40,000. Meanwhile, 3 million people are displaced and facing yet another human disaster as the very cold season of winter kicked off to a bad start. It is raining hard and people have a shortage of food and shelter. Thousands of refugees fear for their lives because they are worried about the spread of contagious diseases and the slow response of relief and rescue missions hampered by bad conditions.
إلى خطر محدق.
In this area, the night is very cold. We face major problems in this refugee camp, such as food shortages. Many injured people are stranded here with no medical attention.
This little girl lost some of her family siblings. She's struggling with fate to stay alive. Many people are sharing the same fate. The Pakistani authority implemented an airlift operation to transport many of the victims to hospitals in the capital city of Islamabad and in the town of Rawi al-Kindi. The hospitals were overwhelmed by the number of casualties brought to their facilities. The situation is really bad in this refugee camp of the province capital city of Muzaffarabad. By far, the situation is much worse in some of the remote areas, out of the reach of rescue and relief efforts.
We used to live in the municipality of Muzaffarabad. We lost all of our family except for one sibling. Currently, I live with my relatives. These tents do not shelter us from the freezing cold of the night, and we do not have any food. It is very difficult for women to get any relief supplies because people push and fight over them.
هذه المساعدات لا تشكل الشيء الكثير.
The supplies brought by relief workers are significantly low in comparison to the high number of refugees, most of whom are women and children.
In the aftermath of the earthquake, I wept alone because my husband and father were killed. I do not have any family left except for one child.
الكارثة خلفت وراءها عدد كبير من أمثال هؤلاء الأطفال.
The disaster left behind many orphan children and widows who are in dire need for psychological care in order to get back to their normal lives. Rebuilding the areas destroyed by the earthquake needs a lot of effort and diligent work. However, it's much harder to get the refugees back to their lives by giving them the hope they had lost in the wake of this disaster.
الأمل بالحياة نجده العالم من مخيم مظفراباد المنكوبة.
نتحدث عن سبتة ومليليا محور حدث الهجرة.
The cities of Sabta and Lilya are the center of discussion among undocumented African immigrants who come in large numbers to start a new life there. Our reporter walked the street of Lilya and interviewed some African and Moroccan immigrants who share the same bitter life of misery and hardship. We will reflect on some of their mischief in the following report.
بعضا منه هذا الريبورتاج.
These undocumented African immigrants are considered to be the lucky ones because they reach the so-called European haven or paradise of Lilya. It is a Moroccan city that is currently under the sovereignty and control of Spain. They came in large numbers after walking for months. Some died while en route, and others are living in refugee camps, awaiting an opportunity to cross over to Europe via the Moroccan border. Cordon is an immigrant from Cameroon who lost some of his friends on his journey.
Many immigrants died in this journey. I lost my best friend in the jungle. The police on the other side of the fence had beaten us severely with sticks and other large objects.
The Spanish authorities started to process the files and applications of many of the undocumented African immigrants after a number of them died on its border. Madrid held the Moroccan government responsible for allowing hundreds of undocumented African immigrants cross over to the Moroccan Spanish city of Lilya. Once in the city, the immigrants face another challenge of misery and hardship. For example, take a look at the following story told by Joseph, an African immigrant.
We had lots of problems in Morocco and were subjected to hard living conditions. The police was always on our cases until we finally made it to the city of Lilya.
In the city of Lilya, this is not the case of African immigrants only, but it is also the case of Moroccan immigrants who also escaped their harsh financial and living conditions in their homeland.
I was living in Morocco, and I did not have anything going for me.
The immigrants' dreams of better lives end right here, at these trash cans where they dig for food and anything of value. What a life.
I am from Morocco.
Where are you from? Huh?
Good.
Where? What are you doing?
I am from Morocco.
Sudan's Darfur region is backsliding into chaos amid a surge in attacks on both displaced people and peacekeepers. The announcement was made by a top UN envoy, warning that international efforts to stop the bloodletting have not succeeded. The account from Juan Mendez, who is the UN Special Advisor on the Prevention of Genocide and who has just visited the region a year after his previous visit, was the latest sobering assessment of the region. There have been new attacks and kidnappings on peacekeepers and civilians in refugee camps. Following the delivery of his latest report to the UN Security Council, Mendez told the news conference he found the situation much more dangerous and worrisome than he had expected. At least 180,000 people have died, many from hunger and disease, and about 2 million others have fled their homes in Darfur to escape the conflict. The conflict erupted when rebels took up arms against what they saw as years of state neglect and discrimination against Sudanese of African origin. The government is accused of responding with a counterinsurgency campaign in which Arab militiamen known as Janjaweed committed wide-scale abuses against the African population. The UN mission monitoring the border between Ethiopia and Eritrea has ordered family and friends of peacekeepers to leave. The instruction came days after Eritrea banned UN helicopters from flying in its airspace, but a UN spokeswoman said the two events were unconnected. The helicopter move had prompted some fears the tiny Red Sea state was moving military personnel and equipment in preparation for renewed conflict with Ethiopia after a 1998-2000 border war that killed an estimated 70,000 people. But senior officials at the UN mission in Ethiopia and Eritrea say they have seen no signs of any military build-up on either side. And a spokeswoman said the clampdown on families was just enforcement of an existing rule. Family and friends have been given 10 days to leave. Asmara has given no reason for stopping the UN helicopter flights that typically resupply peacekeepers and conduct aerial reconnaissance. UN officials say their monitoring capacity has been reduced by as much as 50%. Last month, angered by the continued lack of demarcation of its border with Ethiopia, Eritrea warned it might rekindle its border war with Ethiopia. Under a 2000 treaty, both sides agreed to accept the ruling of an independent boundary commission. But Ethiopia rejected its April 2002 ruling and refused an opportunity for dialogue with Eritrea and the commission in February this year.
The Holy Quran memorization competition in its 15th round was concluded in a splendid Ramadan atmosphere. The program was rich with consecutive events in line with this occasion that valued the royal keenness of His Majesty the Sultan to the Holy Book. His Eminence Sheikh Ahmed bin Hamad al-Khalili, Grand Mufti of the Sultanate, prayed for God Almighty to bless the guide of the Renaissance of His Majesty the Sultan and grant him success for urging the new generation to adhere to the Holy Quran and to be guided by it. This contest officials ensure its role and contribution in bringing up a generation that loves the Holy Book. Such contest was developed to comply with the international and regional competitions that care for the Holy Quran memorization through a new system that specified 5 standards instead of the previous 9 ones, because memorization of less than 1/3 of the Holy Book is done by domestic competitions. The ceremony also comprised examples of the readings of the winners in the contest, religious chants, and presented gifts and appreciation certificates to the winners. 591 male and female competitors participated in this contest. 71 participants won the final contest. Iraqi election officials combed through ballots today from the country's historic constitutional referendum, but the senior electoral commission member Abdul Hussein al-Hindawi said the discovery of anomalies in the vote should not affect the final outcome. He added that there was no question of fraud, but the ballot boxes would be chosen at random and inspected without focusing on specific provinces to settle the issue once and for all. Meanwhile, 3 civilians were killed and another 7 wounded when gunmen attacked the Al-Rahman Mosque in the town of Mahawil, south of Baghdad. Also, Aid Abdul Ghani, an advisor to the industry minister, was killed by a gunman outside his home in Baghdad. The U.S. military said that 2 U.S. Marines were killed by small arms fire near Rutba, west of Baghdad, near the borders with Syria and Jordan, and 4 insurgents were killed in the clash. In Luxembourg, the European Union Foreign Minister declared the spread of the bird flu from Asia into Europe a global threat requiring broad international cooperation to contain. One day after bird flu was recorded in Greece's Aegean Sea island, they also called on the EU Executive Commission to accelerate steps to draft stronger EU rules designed to prevent, combat and eradicate bird flu. Yesterday, Greece banned the export of live birds and poultry meat from the Aegean Sea area, where the EU's first bird flu case was detected a day earlier. Poultry from Turkey and Romania have already been banned after tests confirmed cases of the deadly H5N1 strain. Tests were also being carried out in Bulgaria and Croatia.
Mahmoud Ahmadinejad says Iran's willingness to accept other countries' partnership in its nuclear program is the highest bid possible to build confidence, develop transparency, and improve peaceful nature of its atomic activities. President Ahmadinejad said that Tuesday in a meeting with French new ambassador to Tehran, and added Iran viewed France a free and logical country, but that country's stance over Iran's nuclear activities has hampered Tehran-Paris relations. Bernard Palti said Paris is fully aware
of Tehran's concern to develop nuclear power plant and generate atomic power, and is willing to cooperate in that regard. Secretary of the Supreme National Security Council, Ali Larijani, arrived in Pretoria on Tuesday and took up bilateral ties and Iran's nuclear issue with South African President Thabo Mbeki. At the meeting, President Mbeki said all countries, including Iran, do have the right to civilian nuclear technology, describing Tehran's cooperation with the UN Nuclear Agency as positive. He added there should be no preconditions attached to nuclear talks between Iran and other countries. The Iranian security chief, for his response, said Tehran has honored all international commitments and there has been no diversion in Iran's nuclear program.
Israel has come under harsh criticism from the U.S. State Department for imposing travel restrictions on Palestinians in the wake of Sunday's terror attacks that left 3 Israelis dead. In a message delivered by Security Envoy General William Ward, the U.S. affirmed Israel's right to self-defense, but added that Israel must take steps to ease the so-called daily plight of the Palestinian people. State Department spokesman Sean McCormack said that the Palestinian side has an obligation to fight terror and dismantle terror networks, but Israel must at the same time keep an eye on the goal of 2 states living side by side in peace and security. In the aftermath of the terror shootings, the IDF has blocked access roads linking Palestinian communities with Highway 60 between Jerusalem and Hebron. The army has also encircled Hebron and Bethlehem, reinstated roadblocks in Ramallah, and issued an order forbidding private Palestinian cars from traveling on certain roads. Israel is also continuing its large-scale arrest operation against wanted terrorists and fortified hitchhiking posts along major West Bank roads. In the latest sign of lawlessness in Gaza, Palestinian gunmen today seized 2 men they accused of collaborating with Israel. A newly formed group within the Fatah movement announced it grabbed the men because security forces failed to bring suspected collaborators to justice during the 5-year intifada. A spokesman for the so-called Knights of the Tempest said that they acted after the PA failed to respond to calls. The group says it will put the alleged collaborators on trial, but did not say what would happen if the men if found guilty. The PA Interior Ministry said that security forces would take appropriate measures and would not allow any faction to take the law into their own hands. Palestinian Authority Chairman Mahmoud Abbas headed for Spain today on the next leg of his diplomatic tour, which has taken him to Jordan, Egypt, and France, and ends with talks in Washington with U.S. President George W. Bush on Thursday. Palestinian officials say the meetings in Washington will focus on ways to revive the internationally brokered roadmap peace plan. U.S. officials say that Bush will also press Abbas to disarm terrorist groups. In Paris, Abbas pleaded for French assistance with the organization of parliamentary elections in the territories, scheduled for January 25th. French President Jacques Chirac said he hoped that the Israeli withdrawal from Gaza would provide a catalyst to the peace process. Chirac also reiterated that the roadmap remains the reference for the EU and France. Chirac pressed Abbas to continue with reforms in the Palestinian Authority and said that his country would lend assistance to those working for a just 2-state solution in the Middle East. The U.S. government is reportedly working to prevent an Israeli military response which could damage the diplomatic process following the terror attacks in Gush Etzion in which 3 Israelis were murdered. At the same time, the American government is pressuring the Palestinian Authority to begin disbanding armed terrorist groups. How do the recent attacks complicate the upcoming summit between PA leader Mahmoud Abbas and U.S. President George Bush? And will Abbas continue to receive international support? IBA's Dan Diker discussed these questions with Foreign Ministry spokesman Mark Regev.
I think it demonstrates once again what the real core issue is. I mean, everyone, people of goodwill, want to see reconciliation between Palestinians and Israelis. They want to see us move forward on the roadmap for peace. And you've got groups out there who don't want to see peace, who don't want to see progress, who just want to see violence and terror and jihad. And as long as these groups are armed, they are dangerous.
The views expressed on Mosaic are not those of Link TV or its sponsors, but of the broadcasters themselves. Mosaic is made possible by a grant from the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, which promotes journalism excellence worldwide and invests in the vitality of 26 U.S. communities. And the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. Additional support is provided by the Firedoll Foundation and Henry and Virgilia Dakin.